Hello everyone, and welcome back to Firearms Rights Adviser. Today's video comes from SHOT Show 2026, and we're going to take a careful, neutral look at a new rule recently issued by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, commonly referred to as the ATF. There has been a lot of online commentary surrounding this rule already, much of it focusing on worst-case scenarios or sweeping conclusions. The goal of this video is not to speculate or editorialize, but to explain what the rule actually does, why it was issued, and how it fits into existing federal law. By the end of this video, you should have a clear understanding of whether this rule meaningfully changes anything for firearm purchasers and owners, and in what situations it may matter. The rule we're discussing today is ATF Rule 2025R-54T. It amends Title 27, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 478, which governs many aspects of federal firearms law. The rule is titled Revising the Definition of Unlawful User of or Addicted to a Controlled Substance. The ATF has classified this as an interpretive rule. While interpretive rules typically do not require public notice and comment under the Administrative Procedure Act, the ATF is nevertheless accepting public comments on this rule through June 30th, 2026. To understand why this rule exists, it's important to briefly review the legal background. The firearm prohibition at issue comes from the Gun Control Act of 1968, which bars certain categories of individuals from possessing firearms. One of those categories includes people who are unlawful users of or addicted to controlled substances. However, the statute itself does not precisely define what qualifies as an unlawful user. As a result, federal courts have spent decades interpreting that language. Over time, judicial decisions have clarified that Congress did not intend to prohibit firearm possession based on isolated, experimental, or long-past drug use. Instead, courts have generally required evidence of ongoing and current unlawful use. Despite this, regulatory language and enforcement practices have not always reflected those judicial interpretations, leading to inconsistent outcomes. Federal appellate courts across multiple circuits have addressed this issue. A recurring theme in these cases is that a conviction, or a firearm prohibition, cannot be based on a single instance of drug use. Courts have required proof that the individual used a controlled substance with regularity and close in time to firearm possession or purchase. Some courts have explicitly warned that treating past or sporadic use as disqualifying could render the statute unconstitutionally vague. In response, courts have narrowed the scope of what qualifies as an unlawful user under federal law, emphasizing patterns of behavior rather than isolated acts. The ATF's own guidance, however, has not always kept pace with these decisions, which is one of the reasons this rule was issued. According to the ATF, Rule 2025R-54T is intended to align regulatory definitions with prevailing federal case law. Rather than expanding firearm prohibitions, the rule narrows and clarifies how the existing statute should be applied. Specifically, the rule removes examples and interpretations that could support firearm denials based solely on isolated or historical substance use. The ATF states that such denials are no longer supported by the majority of federal courts and raise unnecessary constitutional concerns. In other words, the agency is attempting to standardize enforcement around interpretations that courts are already using. Under the revised definitions, an unlawful user is a person who uses a controlled substance regularly and over an extended period of time. Unlawful use must be supported by evidence showing both recency and regularity, indicating that the individual is actively engaged in unlawful use. A person is not considered an unlawful user if the use was isolated or sporadic, the use occurred in the distant past, the individual has ceased regular unlawful use. The rule also clarifies that addiction involves a pattern of compulsive use characterized by impaired control. Use of a controlled substance without a lawful prescription continues to qualify as unlawful use under federal law. Additionally, the rule explains that minor or technical deviations from a lawful prescription, by themselves, do not automatically render someone an unlawful user. It is important to note that the ATF has acknowledged this rule may not be the final word on the subject. A pending Supreme Court case, United States versus Hamani, could significantly affect how this statute is interpreted going forward. The ATF has stated that it may revisit this definition after the court issues its decision and after reviewing public comments on this interim rule. Until then, the agency indicates that denials based on outdated interpretations should no longer occur. From a practical standpoint, this rule is expected to reduce some improper firearm denials, particularly those based on isolated or historical substance use. However, it does not create a new right, repeal an existing prohibition, or fundamentally change the background check process. Individuals who regularly and unlawfully use controlled substances may still be prohibited from possessing firearms under federal law. In summary, ATF Rule 2025R-54T is best understood as a clarification rather than a major policy shift. It aligns regulatory language with long-standing federal court interpretations and aims to reduce inconsistency in enforcement. As always, we encourage viewers to read the actual rule and consult qualified legal counsel if they have questions about how the law applies to their specific situation. Thank you for watching Firearms Rights Advisor. Stay informed, stay lawful, and stay safe.